looks like just about every Democrat senator who is running for president is going to be signing on with him, which means that their first priority is to tell 180 million Americans who get their insurance through work that they're going to lose that insurance. Remember when President Obama famously said, if you like your coverage, you can keep your coverage. Now it seems to be, if you like your coverage too bad, you're going to lose it under Medicare for All. And a great majority of people who do have insurance through work like the insurance coverage that they have. So people say, I don't know what Medicare for All is about. Well, as a doctor, I can tell you. It means longer lines and waiting times to get to see a doctor. It means higher taxes. It means fewer choices, less freedom. In terms of the expense, the last time Bernie Sanders introduced this, a nonpartisan group said the cost was going to be over $32 trillion. $32 trillion. This is not the solution for health care in America. Republicans know how important it is to make sure people with pre-existing conditions can have insurance, continue to be covered. We also know how important it is to protect our seniors who their whole lives have paid into Medicare, so they can be now at a point where they're on Medicare and receive the benefits related to those that they paid for and that they've earned. What we need to do for health care is to lower the cost of care, lower the cost of drugs, not have a complete government takeover of health care in America.
So last year, by having a number we agreed to appropriate to on both the defense side of the budget and the non-defense discretionary side, with that number, we've got 75% of all the government funded before the beginning of the fiscal year for the first time in 2 decades. If you ask anybody coming before the Appropriations Committee now that was in that 75%, what that meant to them, it meant they could spend the money a whole lot more effectively if they had it from day one or before day one, rather than get it sometime in the middle of the year. The lesson should have been, I think, what we did for 75% of the government last year to figure out how to do it for 100% of the government this year. For that to work, we have to have an agreement on how much money to spend. The president wants the biggest defense spending number ever. I agree with that. But if you're going to give the Defense Department that number, I guarantee it'll be spent more effectively if they have it before September 30th than sometime in the middle of the appropriating year. We need to get that decided, and certainly I hope we can come up with that determination and get that done soon.
Thank you, everyone. I am going to go back and just remind everybody that there are still a number of communities in Iowa and across the Midwest that remain underwater with our flooding. Communities like Hamburg, Iowa, where the water has yet to recede. And unfortunately, we do have another storm system that is coming through the Midwest. Will hit Nebraska, continue on into Iowa, and we expect heavy rains up and down now the eastern side of our state along the Mississippi River. So our communities are preparing for additional flooding over there. Of great concern to us is that a number of our farmers are still hurting. Their bills continue to increase, and yet they're not able to do anything productive with their land. There are a number of grain bins where we had stored grain, and that grain is now spoiling. That grain is not covered by any sort of insurance protections. So Senator Grassley and I are working on a provision we hope to have included in the disaster supplemental package that would cover the destroyed grain through a USDA disaster program. So we continue to work on that for the folks across the Midwest. We certainly would love to see a supplemental package passed. We don't want to see this as a political football. So I'm encouraging my friends across the aisle, step up, please. We need this aid. The folks down south that were hit last year in the disasters, they need the aid. So I would just ask them to step forward, help us out a little bit. Let's move forward. Let's make sure we're doing the right thing for all these folks that have suffered from these disasters. Thank you.
Well, with another positive jobs report coming out Friday and tax day right around the corner, I think it's fitting that we reflect on all the good that has occurred on account of tax reform and some of the pro-growth policies that Republicans have been able to advance. Since passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we've seen the creation of 3.2 million new jobs. But that's a big number. Let me distill that into the personal experience of one Hoosier lady. Chelsea Hatfield, she's a single mother of 3, a bank teller in Tipton, Indiana. And on account of this tax reform package, her company was able to give her an increase in wages and a bonus. And what's she going to do with that money? Well, she's finishing up her associate's degree, and she's saving up for her children's futures so she can pay for their college education. I see this story replicated all around the state of Indiana, and I know it's occurring all around the country. This is why we passed the Tax Cuts and Job Act. This is why we'll continue to talk about the Tax Cuts and Job Act and how Republican policies have benefited the American people.
Yeah.
You always say that the Senate is in the personnel business, but when it comes to President Trump, he seems to be burning through people here. I mean, isn't part of the problem here not just the Senate confirming people, but getting the administration to pick the right people and stick with them?
Well, of course, who he sends up is his decision, not ours. We have our hands full with what was backed up on the executive calendar, and as you can see, we're now able to process nominees that are largely without controversy in pretty rapid fire order. And we will get a new cabinet member, the Secretary of Interior confirmed this week, and we'll take the nominations as they come.
But do you see this as a problem with him burning through so many people, especially in the past couple of days?
Look, I've got enough personnel work to do here in the Senate without giving him advice about who to send us. Yeah.
Some of your colleagues have expressed concern about what's happened at DHS over the last couple of days. Do you share that concern?
Look, I think the president is legitimately concerned about the crisis at the border. We know that we have not handled immigration well. I would remind everyone, when our Democratic friends had total control of the government in 2009 and 2010, they didn't bring up immigration. Yeah, we got a problem. The only way to fix it is to finally put aside some of our differences and try to focus on it. And I think, personnel is a part of the problem, but failure to act legislatively, failure to secure the border, failure to deal with the crisis that we obviously have at the border is all part of it. Yeah, it's a big problem. Yeah. Well, we're going to look at whoever the president sends up. It's his choice to decide, and once he makes a nomination, we'll take a look at it.
The Save the Internet Act, I'm guessing that it will more than likely pass the House. Where does it stand as far as the Senate is concerned?
On what?
The Save the Internet Act, net neutrality bill?
Net neutrality? Dead on arrival in the Senate.
Leader McConnell, Attorney General Barr said today that he was sending a redacted version of the Mueller report to the Hill. Are you happy with the idea of a redacted version? Democrats have called for all of the information from the Mueller report to be released.
Yeah, here's the problem. Do we really think it's fair to put out classified information or to throw innocent people under the bus? I trust the Attorney General to give us all of the information that we need without revealing classified information or putting out the names of people whose reputations could be ruined who did nothing wrong. So I think it really gets down to a question of whether you trust Bill Barr or not. And I do, and I think he will get us a report that is as open as possible, as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Now I'm proud to be joined by Senators Feinstein, Klobuchar, and Shaheen. Now, as everyone knows, last week, the House passed the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization with important provisions on gun safety and tribal issues included. And it got the support of 33 Republicans in the House, even though the NRA was opposed to it. They are notable because the NRA scored, and yet you heard it right. The National Rifle Association is opposed to the latest version of the Violence Against Women Act, and too many Republicans are just going along. Why? Incredibly, one of the primary reasons the NRA is against this bill is because it closes Senator Klobuchar's amendment, the boyfriend loophole, which would ensure that dating partners convicted of domestic abuse can lose access to their guns. The NRA is woefully out of step with the American people on this issue. Common sense, the same common sense that says if you're a spousal abuser you shouldn't get a gun, says if you're a boyfriend who has treated his girlfriend very badly, he shouldn't get a gun either. So shouldn't matter whether you're married or not. You've got to protect the survivor. Senate Republicans should join their 33 House colleagues in standing up to the NRA and supporting this bill, designed to better protect survivors of domestic violence from their attackers. In addition, the House VAWA bill contained critical provisions to tribal communities, and they've been ignored. When women have been abused on tribal lands, they don't get the same protections that women in the rest of America get. They should be. And I want to salute the Native American community for going along with this issue because it's so important. So, we believe these provisions should not be watered down. We believe funding for the Violence Against Women Act, which Senator Feinstein will talk about, is extremely important. And we're calling on Leader McConnell to bring the House-passed VAWA bill up for a vote without delay. And Senate Republicans should stand up to special interests. They should publicly demand that Leader McConnell bring the bill forward if they care about protecting violence against women. Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Leader. It's amazing, but the Violence Against Women Act turns 25 later this year. I was here when it began. I remember the climate. I remember the delight that women took at that time in seeing this law become part of everyone's life. The original law had two key purposes. First, it improved the ability of law enforcement to investigate and prosecute sex offenses. This includes increased penalties for stalking and a requirement that states enforce protection orders from other states. That's now well accepted. It was not then. And second, the original bill provided a wide range of grant programs to address violence against women from a different variety of angles. They included grants for the law enforcement, public and private service providers, and crime victims. Since then, the bill has been reauthorized 3 times, in 2000, in 2005, and 2013. And each year, the bill has been improved to better protect women. And I hope we do that again this year. Federal funds have been key. And for 2018, VAWA saw $553 million in federal funds. Much of that went to the Department of Justice's Office of Violence Against Women. As a member of the Appropriations Committee, I've had the pleasure of voting for this and will continue to do so. And I'll be working with Senator Joni Ernst on this year's reauthorization. We think the House bill is a very good bill. It's strong. It has more than a dozen improvements over the 2013 reauthorization, each of which I plan to discuss with Senator Ernst. So I think the House bill also increases the authorization of the Rape Prevention and Education Program From 50 million, it trebles it to 150 million. So this is really an important time. And I remember the struggle that this was at the beginning. And now to see that it's established and really accepted by and large by virtually everyone. I hope that continues this time. Thank you.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. Thank you, Senator Schumer, Senator Shaheen. So this is an opportunity we have right now to greatly improve the Violence Against Women Act. Every time this bill comes up for reauthorization, we have the opportunity to improve the bill so that we can get at the crimes that we're seeing against women. And one of the things we've learned over time is that there is a high rate of domestic homicides with guns. And for too long, the ban on getting a gun if you have been convicted of the serious crime of domestic abuse has only applied to married partners, former married partners, or people who live together. Yet nearly half of the homicides, the domestic homicides, are by boyfriends, and so, or some cases, girlfriends. And so that's why this is called the boyfriend loophole. We have been proposing this, Representative Dingell and I, she leading the bill in the House, I've been leading the bill in the Senate for years. We've gotten nowhere until now. And that is despite the fact that there are witnesses on the Republican side that have appeared before the Judiciary Committee that have strongly supported closing this loophole. And we also have in there a provision that would ban people from getting guns if they've been convicted of stalking because of the high incidence of domestic homicides. So here's what we know. We know that a sheriff from Racine County said this. He said, dangerous boyfriends, this is in Wisconsin, dangerous boyfriends can be just as scary as dangerous husbands. They hit just as hard and they fire their guns with the same deadly force. That was at a judiciary hearing just a few years ago. According to the Department of Justice, nearly half of women killed by romantic partners are killed by dating partners. That's why this is so important and why it was included in the House bill. So I'm going to end with this just to remind people what VAWA is about and the fact that it is not just about the dating partner or even the married partner. It is about our whole community. It's about the kids in the family, it's about the neighbors, and it's about everyone that lives in a community when domestic violence hits. We had a case in Minnesota a few years ago where a police officer, young police officer, was called to a scene. It was a domestic report. He went to the door, opened the door. There was a boyfriend in that house that had mental health problems. The young woman who was dating him had called for help. Police officer shows up, the guy shoots him in the face, and he dies. And I was at that funeral. And when I found out when I got there was that the last time that dad, the police officer, had been in that church was for the nativity play for Christmas with his 3 kids. The next time he was in that church was in a coffin with his 3 kids walking down the aisle with their mom sobbing and this little daughter in a blue dress with stars on it. So my question is to the NRA, really? Are you going to be on the side now of domestic abusers and stalkers, or are you going to be on the side of the women of this country? And that's what we're going to be asking our Republican colleagues. We know that 33 Republican House members voted for this bill, and we want to see that kind of support in the Senate.
Thank you, Amy. Senator Shaheen.
Well, amen, Senator Klobuchar. As we know, for many generations, domestic violence was something that people didn't talk about. Fortunately, in more recent decades, since we passed the Violence Against Women Act, we've started to have more honest conversations about domestic violence, and we've taken important steps to protect women and other vulnerable members of our society. Since VAWA was signed into law in 1994, Congress has worked on a bipartisan basis to fund and improve this groundbreaking legislation. And just to follow up on what Senator Klobuchar said, every member of Congress has a responsibility to prevent toxic partisan politics from undermining this law. We need to tune out the special interests who are obstructing this reauthorization. You know, they tried to do it in 2013. I was here. All of the women in the Senate got together, Republicans and Democrats, and we reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act at that point. And as Senator Klobuchar said, it is a fact that the presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. 72% of all murder-suicides involve an intimate partner, and 94% of the victims of these murder-suicides are female. A month ago, tomorrow, in New Hampshire, in a small community called Hollis, a rural community, we had one of those murder-suicides. We had a 51-year-old man who murdered a 41-year-old woman with a handgun, shot her in the head, and then turned the gun on himself. So this is not something that happens someplace else. This happens in our communities everywhere across this country. And we're not going to ignore this awful threat just because it might affect the NRA's bottom line. So we've got to continue to improve the Violence Against Women Act, as everyone who's spoken here has said. We've got to continue to fund this law on a bipartisan basis. We owe it to every individual in this country who fears for their safety because of a domestic threat. When it comes to protecting women and other vulnerable members of our society from violence, Congress must speak with one voice. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank my three colleagues for their excellent presentations. I forgot to add that I was actually the author of the Violence Against Women bill, or the sponsor, the lead sponsor in the House. Senator Boxer had put it together when she was a Congress member. Then she moved to the Senate, called me and said, carry it in the House, and we passed it. And it's done huge amounts of good, huge amounts of good. The shelters that people can go to, the education of the police officers. It's done so much good, and our Republican friends should not be playing games with something so important. Questions?
The Born Alive Abortion Survivor Protection Act says that a baby who survives an abortion must receive immediate medical care and be admitted to a hospital. Do you believe that denying such care constitutes infanticide?
You know, this issue has been brought up over and over again, and it's bogus in terms of how our Republican friends are interpreting this. Infanticide is against the law, and a woman has a right to decide what is her choice with her doctor before that moment, before the child is born. So this is all just, again, fear-mongering and falsification of what is actually happening. Infanticide is already illegal.
Leader Schumer, the leader McConnell was here a couple of moments ago and was asked about Robert Mueller and the report, and said he trusts Attorney General William Barr. Do you trust Barr? Do you trust that these redactions are going to be done in compliance with the law?
Look, I'll wait.
The book is cooked?
I'll wait till I see it, but thus far I don't think Barr has conducted himself in a manner that earns people's trust. To issue a report quickly within 48 hours and now spend weeks before he issues the full report, it calls into question why he was doing what he did. We've heard reports in the media from some people on Mueller's team that he didn't portray the report fairly. We'll wait to see the report, but color me dubious that he's going to be fair unless he proves otherwise. We want to pass the House bill. We don't have to have a Senate bill. Senator Feinstein has said that she believes the House bill is the right bill to go for, and Senator Ernst ought to come along with the House bill if she believes in protecting women.
Senator Shelby said before lunch that the Democrats rejected a serious and substantial offer on disaster relief. Can you say why that is? And also, can you say, is it double standard for Republicans to ask for disaster relief for their home states if they voted against Sandy relief in 2013?
Well, look, we've lived with that. Some of our Republican friends vote for desperate for disaster aid when it's their states and don't help other states. Democrats have not done that. We believe we all ought to pull together and help American citizens wherever they are. We have offered a bill now, Senator Leahy and I, that funds both the Midwestern areas that have been flooded and Puerto Rico. And this idea that, well, Puerto Rico should be treated differently than other places is unfair. If food stamps is good enough for Puerto Rico, then let's just do food stamps for the other areas. But if they want to rebuild homes and want to rebuild roads, we need full relief for all of America. That's what Leahy's amendment and my amendment does. And if they believe in that, they ought to pass it. We all know what happened. President Trump went to the Republican lunch and said that he's for no aid for Puerto Rico, and then they backed off their position. That's wrong, and that will not prevail. The House will never go along with it. So if they want aid for other areas, they ought to treat every part of America fairly.
The President announced his intent to nominate Stephen Moore and Herman Cain to the Federal Reserve. Your views on their fitness for those posts?
You know, I'll wait for the hearings, but the bottom line is that the reaction among even conservative economists like Greg Mankiw that this would politicize the Fed, one of the last parts of the federal government that hasn't been politicized, I think is very, very real. I don't see the qualifications of Cain or Moore fitting in with the mission of the Fed, which is to conduct monetary policy and not be political. Thank you, everybody. Sorry.